Hello, I'm Group Manager Adam Bleakman and I was one of the incident commanders at the Ravensdale Infant School fire. At 01:36 hours on Monday the 5th of October 2020, Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service received the first of 11 999 calls to reports of a fire outside at Devonshire Drive, Mickleover, Derby. The first fire engine was mobilised from Kingsway Fire Station, 1.9 miles from Devonshire Drive, and was on scene within 9 minutes of the initial call. On arrival, crews located the fire at Ravensdale Infant School. The fire was well developed at the front of the school and was spreading towards the rear. The first attending fire engine was met with a well-developed fire in the school buildings, and they forced entry through school gates to gain access to the site. Additional fire service resources were requested, along with requests for police attendance. As the incident progressed, a resource and command structure was put in place to deal with the fire and its wider impacts. At the height of the fire, there were 8 fire appliances, 2 aerial ladder platforms, 1 water carrier, 1 incident command unit, 1 welfare unit, and 5 flexi duty officers in attendance. This equates to in excess of 60 fire service personnel from across the county. Firefighting efforts continued throughout the night and well into the next day. This included the use of water curtains and jets to protect the adjacent Ravensdale Junior School buildings, along with jets from the aerial ladder platforms and firefighting jets. Whilst the efforts of those on scene meant the junior school was largely unscathed, the infant school was severely damaged and has had to be rebuilt from scratch. At 17:47 hours on Monday the 5th of October, a stop message was sent to Fire Service Control confirming the fire was now out.
Okay, so bad memories. On the evening of the fire, can you just explain to us how you were notified of the fire, please?
So it was about 1:45 in the morning. We had a phone call to our landline, and I don't know if, like me, you ignore the landline because nobody ever rings it anymore. So it woke us up, we ignored it, and then it rang again, and somebody asked for me, and it was our burglar alarm company ringing me, and he said, "I'm ringing you to let you know your alarm's going off at school." And I was sort of obviously just waking up and also quite confused, and I said, "Why are you ringing me? That's your job," sort of thing, to go and check it. And he said, "Oh, I'm ringing you to tell you that one of our guys has gone down there and your school's on fire." And you sort of come round and you think, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, your school's on fire." That was it, really, and he'd gone. So I sort of said to my husband, well, I won't tell you what I exactly said, but I sort of said, "My school's on fire." So I rang 999, because you never quite know if it's genuine or hoax or what. So I rang 999 and spoke to the fire service, and they confirmed that, yes, it was on fire, and the fire crews were already there. And I think they'd been there over an hour at that point.
Okay, so you say it was the burglar alarm company that rang you. Was the school fitted with a fire alarm, and how did that work?
Yeah, it was fitted with one, but it wasn't connected to fire service or anything. It was just ringing out, basically.
Okay, so when you arrived at the school, what was the scene you were confronted with? What was it like?
So pretty much what you saw there. There were loads of fire crew. We had Derbyshire, Staffordshire, Nottinghamshire crews all in attendance. The school was massively on fire. I don't think I've ever seen a fire like it. And there were hoses everywhere, and they got the platform up, and they'd gone through, because we were in a cul-de-sac, it's quite hard to get to the school. So they'd actually gone through a little old lady's garage, broken the windows and taken the hoses through that way. She slept through the whole thing, she had no idea. But it was just full of police, fire, and obviously the fire was blazing and had really taken hold by that point.
How were you feeling about it at the time? Can you remember how you felt about it?
I think I wasn't allowed any further than the gates for obvious reasons, and I think I was just in a daze, to be honest. I just sort of stood looking and watching everybody running around and working, and just completely helpless, because there was nothing I could do other than just watch. And I stood there from about 2 a.m. till probably 6 o'clock the following night, just watching it all burn down, basically.
When we've spoken previously, you talked about your interactions with the fire service on that night and how they were trying to stop the fire.
Yeah, they were brilliant. So Adam was one of the I don't know what his title was on the night, but he was in charge of it all, and he would keep coming in and talking to me and telling me where they were at, and he was sort of saying things like, we've lost this part of the building, we're now trying to save. Our hall was in the middle of the school, so all the rest of the school went round the hall. He said, we're going to try and stop it getting to the hall. Then he'd come back a bit later and say, we've lost the hall, we're going to try and stop it getting to this part of the school, and so on and so forth, and that went on, and then eventually, because we share a site with a junior school, and there's probably, at the closest point, there's probably only a metre, 2 metres between us. So obviously after a while, when they knew they weren't going to save our building, the priority was to save the junior school. So that became the big thing, and they put a water curtain up to protect the junior school, which luckily they did. Just sort of melting, and that was all they had, luckily.
So complete destruction of the infants and nursery school,
Yeah.
and sort of impinging onto the face of the junior school.
Yeah.
And tell us about water damage in the junior school.
Yeah, so our school was slightly higher than the junior school on the site. So obviously at first it was thought that, well, from us, the fire crew probably knew differently, but from us we were quite relieved that the school seemed to have escaped without any damage other than a bit of melting on the fascias. But it came apparent after a few days that the water that they'd used on our site had obviously seeped underneath the junior school, drained away, and lots and lots of water, drained away under their school, and after a bit their hall floor started to bubble and raise, and so it went through quite a few classrooms into their hall. So that also had to become part of our insurance claim, to have all their new flooring done.
It's interesting that some of the criticisms that we get for sprinkler systems is, well, they cause water damage, but when you look at an entire school destroyed, and then water from firefighting affecting the school next door, on this case, it's quite an eye-opener. Okay, so that was the fire. When the dust settled the day after, what sort of happened next from the point of view of the council, etc.?
So we've got 300 children at our school from age 3 to age 7. So obviously the priority was getting them back into some form of education somehow. We were in the middle of the pandemic as well, so it was all complete madness. There's a church just down the road from us, and they gave us access to the church. They were brilliant. So we used their link room, and the following morning we had an emergency meeting with Derby City Council emergency planning team, and we met with them every morning for about 3 weeks at 8:15, myself and my leadership team. And in those 3 weeks, we had to come up with a plan of what we were going to do with the children, where we were going to school them, if you like, and all the sort of elements that went with that. And in the meantime, we went back to remote learning that we'd become dab hands at during COVID. So we started doing that, but we also had to feed the children in that time, because we've got our pupil premium children who are eligible for a free school meal, but we've also got, up to the age of 7, all children are eligible for a universal free school meal. So because we get funding for that, we had to provide food for them. So we set the task of our teaching assistants would go to the local Tesco with trolleys and fill up with loaves of bread and anything that we thought, might help the families. And then we would do home runs, home visits, and take them basically a loaf of bread, a packet of ham, a packet of cheese, some drinks, to allow them to give the children a packed lunch for a week at a time. We did that every week while we were out.
Okay, so it's something that you don't think about, isn't it? The catering side of things. But so you had 300 children, and just remember that a couple of days before your fire, there'd been another fire in Derby City Council with a complete loss of a building. That school was a trust school. And what they did was they went into private accommodation and rented a commercial property and used that whilst their school was being rebuilt. So, but then over to you had 300 children. So what did it look like for the sort of geography and moving people around for 300 kids?
So we went through lots of different scenarios of where we could have the children so that they could go back into education, really. And in a way, we were fortunate that there were, at the time, 2 brand new schools that had opened within sort of a year or so that weren't full. So one was sort of quite a long way across the city, and the other one was more local. So we could use those 2 schools to house our reception children and our year 1 children, and then the local secondary school gave us their year 10 classrooms for our year 2 children, and our nursery children went to a different school again where they had a separate building that we could use as a nursery provision. And that was a challenge because obviously we then had to get the children there. Our children, about 50% can walk to school, 50% are out of catchment. So we had to put transport on for them. So we had buses that would come every morning at 8 o'clock to the main road near the school, and they would take the different year groups to the different schools, which was obviously a challenge for parents. If you've got a 4-year-old, they've only been in school 3 weeks, and suddenly you've chosen this school because you can walk to it, and suddenly your little child is going on a bus across the city. It's not what any parent wants. And they would leave at 8 o'clock in the morning and they wouldn't get back till 4 o'clock in the evening. So that was a lot of pressure on us to get it right. It was very challenging putting little children on a bus, getting them seat belted in, getting them to stay in their seats could be a challenge. So we had to increase our teaching assistant hours, and they would go on the buses with the children every day for 2 years, which wasn't nice.
And additional costs as a result of that with the overtime, etc.
Yeah. So we have to pay.
I bet the children with 4-year-olds, I bet they were knackered, weren't they?
Yeah. It was a really long day. Half of them would be asleep on the way home. Some of them were asleep on the way there, to be honest. Yeah, it was a really long day for them. We did have some of our children who have special educational needs, couldn't manage that at all. So a bit further on in the story, we ended up with some temporary buildings on one of the junior school sites, fields. And some of the children who couldn't manage the bus joined a different year group and stayed a bit closer to home, which they found a bit easier to manage.
Okay, so children impacted from a sort of an emotional point of view. You told me as well over when we were having a coffee earlier that some family groups were split up during that period, and some kids went to one and some kids went to another.
Yeah, so that I don't think we really appreciated how important it is when your children are first at school, when they see their brother or sister at school as well. It probably didn't even come onto our radar at the time, but when we then came back together eventually, and the children would spot their brother or sister on the playground or in the school, and how excited they were to see them when they hadn't been in school with them for so long, it kind of brought it home of the effect that had on them not having their sibling around.
And what about sort of a key question, really? Do you notice an impact on education attainment, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, it was in the middle of COVID, so it was all a bit different anyway. We weren't having to report on data at the time because of the pandemic, but we didn't have anything. We didn't have any resources. We didn't have any interactive screens. We didn't have tables and chairs. So, for a while, the children in some of the schools were working on picnic tables, the wooden picnic tables with benches, until we could source and buy the right size tables, the right size chairs for the right year group, because they're all different sizes in schools. So our reception children needed a certain type of furniture, and the year 2s needed something else. So teaching them was really challenging for the teachers. They didn't see each other for 2 years pretty much because of the pandemic as well. So that sort of networking they do with each other and sharing planning and all those things was massive. And I think we had to come off the curriculum for quite a while because we just didn't have the capacity to teach that, and our children weren't in a place to accept that because it was such a long day for them, and they were really struggling emotionally with it all. So that had a massive impact on them.
So you were focusing mostly on nurturing rather than the education?
Yeah.
Okay. What about your staff? Was there a big impact on your staff, and how did that manifest itself?
So at the time of the fire, we had about 50 staff in the school. By the time we moved back into the new school, we had about 11 existing staff left. So yeah, a big turnover of staff, and not because of anything other than it was just really hard. You know, they would go to different sites. We ended up with using another school later on, right in the city centre. There was no parking for staff. They had to pay at a car park in town and walk to park and everything. They had to car share, and it was just massive for them. And they ended up getting to a point where they would be leaving school pretty much with the children at the end of the day, which, although it might sound nice, it's quite hard for them then and quite demoralising. And I think they lost the joy of it all, the joy of teaching for a while, because it was just too difficult to manage, you know, all those different things.
So we've talked about the fire, the impacts on children, education, and staff. We obviously lost quite a lot of staff, and morale must have been really difficult at the time.
Yeah.
Coming now to the new school being built, talk to us a little bit about how that went, interaction with the construction company, and maybe some of the insurance costs that you had.
So the construction company was Morgan Sindall, and they were really good at involving us. Obviously, I'd never done anything like this before. That's not my thing, designing schools, but they were very good, and they involved us in a lot of the discussions initially with the planning side of it. Because we were in new schools, we could take a little bit of what we liked and what we didn't like, and, you know, magpie ideas and so on. So yeah, we were involved in that to a point. But it was really hard to visualize it, because it was hard to know what it was going to look like, and they'd show us all the drawings and, you know, go through things with us, and they were great, and we got our governors involved as well, and Derby City Council were involved, and we would go for visits on the site. We had different site visits where we could look at things and talk about things and change things. So yeah, it was exciting, I guess, in one sense, but quite scary, because it's such a massive responsibility that we wanted to get it right, you know. And we didn't have a massive say, because the DFE kept coming back to us that it wasn't a new build, it was a rebuild. So it was supposed to be like for like. Well, ours was a 1950s clasp ceiling, clasp roof building, which really wasn't fit for purpose. But the new school is nothing like the old school. But we weren't allowed certain things that we knew we needed for a school because it wasn't a new build. So there were quite a few restrictions on us as well.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I missed that last time we chatted. That's unbelievable, because it is a brand new modular building with sprinklers.
Yeah.
And the total cost of getting you back into school was?
It was about £8 million.
Just the 8 million?
Yeah.
Okay. Insurance.
Yeah.
So you were out of school for 20 months.
Yeah.
Talk to us about some of the difficulties you had with sourcing equipment initially, and then when you occupied the school.
So obviously we were starting from scratch. We had to get everything, and you don't know what you need. You're so used to having everything. Schools are packed full of stuff that you pack away at certain times of the year, and you don't get out for another year because, you know, like Christmas stuff, costumes. There were things that we didn't know we needed till we needed them, but it was a challenge. It was a challenge with the insurance, because every single thing we needed to buy was questioned. So every time we put an order in or something in, it had to go through us at school, then it had to go through Derby City Council, then it had to go to the insurance people, and sometimes they would come back with loads of questions, and we weren't asking for anything unusual, you know. We had to have 300 chairs or whatever, and, you know, we had no choice in things, but every single little thing was questioned. which made it a challenge. And obviously things take a long time to come through, so we couldn't place the order until we got the go-ahead from the insurance company. So it delayed. It took a long time. We're still feeling the impact of it now.
One of the things that I didn't realise when I first spoke with Lorna about this was that when the children went off to the 4 different schools that they were sent to as the temporary accommodation, Ravensdale had to contribute to the utility bills for those schools as well. So the cost was still going on in the background of kind of like running a school and paying utilities as a basic one, whilst you didn't have a building. You know, it was still going on. Okay, so lots going on. What was the hardest challenge you found as a leader, as a head teacher, you're the leader of the school? What was your hardest leadership challenge?
Gosh, I think keeping the staff, which you might think, well, you didn't do that very well because most of them left. They didn't all leave at the same time. It was over a period of time, and, you know, and some got promotions and everything else. We did appoint teachers, obviously, in that time as well, which I still to this day think was unbelievable that anybody wanted to come and work at a school that wasn't there, that didn't have a building. But that was really hard, keeping staff motivated. You know, over Christmases we did Secret Santa virtually, and because we didn't have anywhere we could all meet together, but also it was COVID time, so we couldn't meet together anyway. So keeping the staff motivated, keeping them safe, because like I say, they had to walk to car parks, and it gets dark really early in the winter, and they were having to walk through the city centre in not great areas back to their cars, which, you know, that was a challenge for us all. And keeping our families together was really hard. Our parents were very loyal, and we didn't really lose many families. We lost a few, but not many, which I'm really grateful for, because that is where our funding comes from on our numbers with the census and everything. So we were very fortunate. Parents were very vocal about how they felt about us being split up, very vocal about them going on buses and what a strain it was and how awful it was. I mean, you know, I would get mouthfuls most mornings waiting for the bus from parents, but they still kept bringing their children. So I guess we were doing something right. But it was, the staff and the families, I think, was probably the biggest challenge.
Okay, and so I suppose a final question before I sum a few things up. Were there any lessons learned that you think if it were to happen again, you would be different, maybe do differently?
That I would do differently?
Well, that may have made things better for you.
Well, I'm speaking to the converted, I know, but we now have sprinklers in our new building. At the time of the new building being constructed, Derby City Council said that all new schools, all new buildings would have sprinklers fitted, and we do have sprinklers, which I think would have made a massive difference. And, you know, on the night of the fire, watching the fire take hold so quickly, I mean, it just flew through the building. Obviously, if we'd have had sprinklers, our sprinklers now are zoned, so they could have protected. They were trying, but they just couldn't do it. The fire was too big. They couldn't get a grip on it. So, but obviously sprinklers would have done that, and we would have saved 2 years of an awful, awful time for us all.
We probably wouldn't have been sat here talking about it.
No, we probably wouldn't.
I think really, I mean, I don't know about you, but I think being a head teacher is probably a challenging job to begin with, and listening to all of the additional impact and pressures and logistics. Managing the staff and 4 different centres and not having an office to do it from because it had burned down. What a challenge that is. It's massive, isn't it? So I'd say well done on that one.
Thank you.
Did Ofsted cut you any slack?
Ofsted never cut anybody any slack. We weren't due an inspection until we were back into our new building. Thank goodness. They did come probably about 18 months after we'd moved back in. But no, they didn't cut us any slack. They didn't take that into account at all. No. Okay.
I think really in summary is I don't know about you, but so my background was the fire service before I got involved in, when I got involved in dealing with the sprinkler network. And in the fire service, we would, go out to fires and we'd put them out, we'd jump back on the fire engine and we would leave the scene and we would have no further interaction with the people who would have the fire or the businesses. So you become completely immune to any of that aftermath and the impacts and the emotion and the feeling that people are going through, or certainly it was for me. My wife will describe me as a clanging empty bucket of empathy sometimes. But and I guess really thinking that speaking to people from the sprinkler industry, you won't have maybe heard some of those stories before, because obviously if you put sprinklers in buildings, we know they're reliable and we know they're effective, and this doesn't happen. So to be able to hear that story and see the work that you're doing and the benefits of the work that you're doing and what it can prevent, I'm hoping that you're feeling some professional pride about that and maybe carrying that torch forward to continue and promote the use of sprinklers in the built environment. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you. Thanks very much, Lorna.
Thank you.